One of the things that I found, no matter what I speak on, wherever I speak in the world, one of the biggest challenges seems to come in cost estimation of software projects. It seems to be a daunting task. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time this morning talking to you about cost estimation basics, talk a little bit about what are project requirements, how can we demystify these, especially for our clients and our customers who may not be technical. What can we do about creating estimates before requirements so that when we know that they're wrong, especially when we estimate way, way before requirements. And I've got in here, I've added something new for this webinar, which is a case study, which is what happens when you are asked, as one of my clients was asked, to create an estimate, a reliable estimate in 10 minutes. Does that ever happen to you? Now, if I was standing in front of a big audience, I know that there would be 90% of your hands would go up and you'd say, that happens to me all the time. And then we're going to talk about what are some next steps. What are the things that you can do in your company to start feeling confident about some of these estimates you have to do. So to get started, one of the things you may feel like when you're doing a cost estimate is it's kind of like reaching through a wall. Some of the kids' museums have a wall that you can reach through, and it's kind of like having a glove, and you have to feel what is on the other side. And that's kind of how I feel we sometimes go through life as software estimators, as cost estimators, as project engineers, and sometimes as programmers, people who have to estimate without really knowing what's on the other side. So from a cost estimating standpoint, the challenge is if we've got requirements in place, now I'm assuming that we're going to take it from the start, we've got good requirements. Our first challenge comes in the line of accuracy. Do we have accurate inputs to this estimation equation? Availability. Do we have the available cost-loaded factors? What are our inputs? Do we know all of those inputs that we need to have to do a good estimate? What is the applicability of historical data? Do we have historical data? Do we have projects that are like the one that we're estimating that we can go back to? What about completeness? Do we have complete requirements in terms of hardware, in terms of software, in terms of other things we're going to have? What about risk? Is it calculated? Is it predictive? And then we've got the idea of what is included or excluded. Whose time is included? Do we include the programmer's time? Do we include, of course we'd include programmer's time, but what about the contracted staff? I've been in places where the cost estimates only include contracted people. So that means if you've got internal teams, they don't include that in the cost estimate at all. And if I use that basis for a future estimate, is it really going to be reliable? If I don't know what's included or excluded in previous projects, and I don't know what's included or excluded or will be excluded or included in this project, how can I do a good estimate? That's a challenge. Well, when we take a look at this, we've got this pursuit of faster, better, cheaper. We want fast. We want it done by a certain date. We've got constraints. Sometimes we've got a fixed date or a budget. Steve McConnell, who's written a number of books, has said that the #1 cost estimating method in use in the United States and Canada is called date-driven estimating. And date-driven estimating is probably something that you're familiar with. It's something like this. Carol, I just came from a meeting, and I promised the legislature, the Congress, my staff, marketing, that this unnamed project will be finished by March 31st. What date can you give it to me? And then we back into that all the way, and we say, okay, March 31st, so that means testing needs to be done by February 28th. That means that this has to be done by, and so requirements had to have been finished 2 months ago. That can be a constraint. That can be a major problem. And date-driven estimating is really not the best way of going. We can have constraints in terms of budget. We've budgeted a certain amount for this unknown project. This creates a false sense of security. And we end up with an estimate. Is estimate really reality? If I say that it's approximately 1.2 million, or I say it's approximately 1 million, what normally happens? That ends up being the project budget. And that creates unfair pressure on a cost estimator to predict the future. And if we look at the word estimate, it means to anticipate, to make a guess with the best information available at hand, not to predict. We can never predict the future. There are way too many intangibles, there's way too many unknowns, and life always intervenes. So it really creates unfair pressure on the project manager Because even if you've done a good cost estimate based on everything that you thought, based on the requirements that you've got in place, based on all the constraints, all the contingencies, all of the risks, it's really the project manager that's going to have to carry those out. So what happens? What other cost estimating challenges do we have? Well, we've got this issue of the weakest link, and I'm sure you've heard that term, that the weakest link is really the strength of a chain, that a chain is based on its weakest link. In cost estimating, whatever the weakest link is going to determine the accuracy of our estimate. So if we've got no idea what the requirements are, that's going to be the weakest link. If we have no idea who the people are that are going to be involved, whether we're going to outsource part of it to India, that's going to be the weakest link. And we also need to know that garbage in, no matter how sophisticated our estimating models may be, garbage in is going to give us garbage out. And what about comparable projects? How do we figure out what is a comparable project? And I want to, at this point, tell you that when we talk about project hours, this is an error-laden area. So if I tell you that I've got 1,000 project hours to do project A, do you know what that means? Can you use 1,000 project hours as a basis of estimating for project B? It depends. As long as you know who was in the corral, did it include management? Did it include project management hours? Did it include trainers? What did it include? That's one of the dimensions. We need to know who is in the corral if we're going to compare similar projects in terms of hours or in terms of cost. We also need to know what were the starting and stopping points. If project A starts at the beginning of requirements and project B starts at the beginning of coding, are they comparable projects? No. Now we're comparing apples and oranges. And even though we may have hours, every hour is 60 minutes, every minute is 60 seconds, they're not comparable. We've also got the consideration of whether or not overtime is included. So we've got to really have solid comparisons. We've got to put lines around the box for these project hours if we truly want to have comparable projects. Estimating made easy. Well, estimating isn't that difficult. And really, we start out with needs, and we need to document those. From needs, we can go into an estimate. And from an estimate, we can get a result. So in terms of requirements, we need to really have functional, non-functional, technical, and other requirements in order to do a good estimate. We need to document our assumptions. We need to have constraints documented. And really, if we take a look at a construction project, if we look at buildings, and I know software engineering as an engineering discipline, and my background is mechanical engineering, so I've been through this. But engineering disciplines never would do an estimate on a bridge or a road design if you had no idea how far the span is going to be. If you didn't know which river you were going to cross, there's no way you would ever do an estimate in terms of a bridge construction cost. But we do that all the time. We need to have something in place as a sketchy floor plan at least. We need a floor plan, a building code, we need blueprints, we need to know the environment. And from that, we can then compare what we've got, what we need to have done, through equations, through history, through comparisons, through relationships. We can do things such as cost per square foot, to give you an example of how much a building should cost. And it's passive. An estimating equation, this is one of the biggest fallacies in cost estimation. Cost estimation equations are passive. If you throw in garbage, it will churn it very eloquently into wonderfully, seemingly precise results. But it's really passive, and it's not idiot-proof. So if you say you want to do a project that is 50,000 lines of code,